Hey, I'm Sophie and I am the Firefly Creatrix. Some of you may have come to the launch of the website, which happened on the 22nd of December 2022, which was the darkest night of 2022. This idea that even in the dark, the most dark times, there is light. There is these little speckles and these little flashes of inspiration, of curiosity, and that also in those kind of dark, restful periods of our life, doesn't have to be in the darkest time of the year, that there's also these gems come through, that rest and the space and the quiet really helps the intuition, the insights, and the kind of deep inner knowing to be released. So yeah, that was what happened at the end of 2022. The Firefly Creatrix has been something that it has been bubbling away for a little while. I've been a designer. I guess I wanted to start this conversation, this kind of hopefully series of conversations that will hopefully invite other people in later down the line. But for now, especially as it's January, it's quiet, it's introspective time, it's uncomfortable time for me. There's a sense of meeting the edges, the discomfort, and yeah, so it feels like a time for me just to talk by myself to start with, to introduce myself more fully, honestly. Yeah, again, the dark and the light. I'm recording this on a sunny Sunday. The sun is out. It's January 2023. And tonight is my natal moon goddess. And there's a peace with that. There's a peace that comes into me with that, knowing that tonight is my natal moon goddess. Her name is Ugraprabha, and she is quite an intense, she's one of the Kali sisterhood. So there's 15 Kali sisterhood goddesses that run from the full moon to the new moon, and then there are 15 Lalita sisterhood who are slightly more soft and benevolent, but they definitely still have their intensity and their power in a different form, that comes in maybe through in a different with a different energy. So tonight, is Ugraprabha, and my illustration of her shows her sat on a corpse, which is the description. She's sat on a corpse. She's got 4 arms. One holds a severed head, one holds a knife, one holds a cleaver, and the other holds a skull bowl. And she has this intense bright light shone on her from up high, from the sky. And she is the goddess of, her statement, her affirmation is, I am intensity. And the kind of insight that came through with that for me, that is connected to the cards which I've created. She says, I shine a light on hard truths with terrifying intention. My vast plethora of shadow-like feelings deserve to be seen. She really highlights that. They deserve to be seen, acknowledged, and therefore validated so that the full magnitude of my creative source can flourish. My creativity demands it. I am free from the invisible anchors of perceived flaws that have held me back, and I revel in the sensation of being completely accepted. So yeah, that's her kind of message. As I found when I was drawing the goddesses, so for anyone who doesn't know, you can find them on the website. But the goddesses, the moon phase goddesses, are a set of 30 goddesses which come from ancient South Asian tradition. They appear in various different lineages and traditions, but yet they're not very well known. They are, again, this sort of less coveted, deep, dark, feminine. And each one of them represents a phase of the moon cycle. So each night has a goddess which is affiliated with that phase of the moon. And I spent 6 months of 2022 drawing them, and it came through very clearly that that's something that would be really, well, that wasn't clear at the time. What was clear was that they wanted to be drawn, and that it would be something very nourishing and developmental. There was a developmental element to it because I only drew them on their particular moon phase. So with Ugra Prabha, for example, I would only draw her on this night of the moon, which is the last quarter moon of the cycle. So we're 3/4 of the way through the full cycle. And so each time I met her, the experience was completely different. And I think that's what's so beautiful about channeling the words. So the words came later. I finished the drawings, or I was just finalizing the drawings, and then it became clear that I did want to create them into a sort of deck of cards. We also have, and that's how I found out, but then there are another set of cards created by Nya Patrinos, who's in the US. So this, if anyone watching the video, you can see her card. I'm just holding it up. But she has 2 versions, but the ones I have are the words only, with the yantras, with the geometric shapes that correlate with the goddess. And so for me, that description of the physical bodies was what I'd been working with for a few years. And so that's what inspired me to then draw them in my way, in a way that I connected with. And it doesn't mean they're right for everybody, doesn't mean they're exactly what the ancient sages might have expected, but they're right for me and whoever connects with them right now in this time, in this moment. And they kind of are an evolution and a mark in history of these goddesses. And someone else might interpret them completely differently, and that's beautiful and wonderful. And I love that. And probably if I did it again next year, they would look completely different. So it's really that connection with now, and with a particular timestamp. So I don't know where I've gone now, but the words that came through later, which is these words that I've just read about Ugra Prabha, who she knows that her shadow-like feelings deserve to be seen, and that her creativity demands that they can be seen, so that she's free from these invisible anchors of perceived flaws. Those words came through later, towards the end of the process, and it's interesting now even to read them. I don't remember writing that, in a way. Like it was such a channel. It was such a kind of, I sat with the goddesses. I took a month in Greece, and I was working on a few different things, but one of the main intentions was to really ground in that process that I'd been through, or that I've been experiencing, and to allow the words that wanted to come from each goddess to be heard, to be processed, to be some of them, took a lot more not editing. I don't know if that sounds more, but they were like, no, that's not right. It's not quite right. That's nice, but it's not quite right. So it just, some of them took a few more kind of goes, let's say, to kind of capture the essence of what they wanted to share. And so every time I read it now, every month, and there's also obviously the option to just pick a card to work with them as an oracle deck, and pick a card, and it doesn't matter what night of the moon it is tonight. It's what your energy is kind of drawn towards today will give you potentially an insight as to something that you might, and how you relate to that card, to that energy, to the drawing, and also to the words that she shares will change each time. And I love that. So here we are, January 2023. It's my natal moon night, and been on this journey with those goddesses. I've been a designer for, well, I've been a designer for my whole life, but I wouldn't say, as a child, I wouldn't have said a designer. I would have said I wouldn't have said illustrator. I would have said artist, because that was the word that I knew, and that's what I loved doing, was drawing. And so creativity has basically run through my entire life. And I always wanted to be an author as well, and I do now have 2 books aimed at children, which have been written for children, which have been released into the world. So there's part of my childhood's kind of dreams have come true, and yet there's still a lot more to come, I'm pretty sure. But just so people get an idea of me and where I've come from. So I did, at age 14, decide that I wanted to be a graphic designer. And that was what I loved at school, and it kind of utilized and used a lot of the kind of skills that I was honing and the things that I was really interested in. So I went on to study at Norwich School of Art and Design, as it was called at the time. Just studied graphic design, and then went to London and worked in the kind of what I would now refer to as the corporate, more corporate design industry in packaging design, which I absolutely adored. It brought me so much joy to be welcomed into such a kind of fantastical industry that, you know, you could be working on something and then a few weeks later, generally months later, sometimes years, see it on shelf in a supermarket and just have that kind of again, I probably wouldn't have had the words for this at the time, but to see that ripple effect, to see how something that you've a concept that you've come up with at your desk, maybe late at night, there was a lot of late hours and long days and hard meetings and everything else, but then at the end of it, that what kept me there for the time that I was there was this sense of purpose, and that there was, for every idea that I put this in inverted commas, that worked, that was allowed to flourish and grow, and it then became interpreted by consumers and people who came across it in the outer world without the sort of design mind. They got to interact with it in their own way, and that's the sort of the journey. Interestingly, the journey that I'm on now with the goddesses is that I can feel myself wanting to explain them, and yet they don't need any explanation. They are who they are, and each illustration is what it is, and the beauty is that everyone interacts with them in a different way. But I also I would class myself as a recovering perfectionist and a recovering people pleaser, and I think that's something that I'm going to always be working with, is that are those kind of desires to meet a certain expectation, and the expectation is always from me. And I'm sure these are things that we'll go into more down the line, but just to kind of give an overview right now. So then when I left the kind of left employment, full-time employment, I decided to go freelance, which at that time to me meant to, and this is what I did, to work in different studios around London who had similar focuses on packaging design, sometimes more on branding design, and it meant that I got to work in various different sizes of teams, and with different focuses, with different kind of budgets. So again, a really varied experience over a few years, that just allowed me to meet these different approaches to creativity. And I think this was where things started to break down, and I'm a person that takes things quite literally, and so at school and at university, even when someone says that that's good, or this is the right way, I would take that as, especially if it was someone in authority. And again, this is a theme that could, this could be a year-long discussion. That I would take that as gospel. And so what I recognized by being in one company for a certain length of time was that I felt like that was the right way, or like that I'd allowed myself, and I'm not saying that they did anything to me, it was like I allowed those ways to become the right way in me. And so since then it's really been, and again, not consciously at first, but since then it's been this decolonizing process of understanding that every different kind of creativity and every different approach is valid and valuable and has its own strengths and beauty, and there's no wrong. Again, at the time I would definitely have said that there was wrong, and I probably was quite judgmental. I'm not sure if I would have liked to meet myself with in my incarnation that I'm in now. I'm not sure I would have liked to meet myself at that time. I think I might find it a bit triggering in terms of talking about design. And so yeah, there's been this journey that I've been on to break that down within myself. And so where I'm at now, and so yeah, there's a whole different, there's a slightly separate chapter that fits in the middle, which was that as part of being freelance, you have more flexibility, more sort of choice over not over when you work, because you have to fit within an office timetable, but obviously you can take more time off than when you were employed. So I did a lot more traveling, and actually 2015 I traveled for the entire year. I took the year off and traveled around Asia, and that was another big turning point for me. Again, there could be podcasts just about this part of my journey, but as part of that, I experienced the 2015 Nepal earthquake, which definitely changed the trajectory of that trip, and changed the trajectory of my life in terms of where my creativity became, how my creativity became a different kind of tool for me. It became a way to raise awareness, raise funds, and those kind of things. So again, it made me have to question my, still at that time, quite limited, quite blinkered, I'm trying to think of the right word, quite blinkered view of what was good creativity and what was valuable, and etc., those kind of things. So there was that chapter, and then there's been a chapter sort of in between the Firefly Creatrix really being birthed, which was to move into this section which was called Stop, Breathe, Grow, and that's still very much an ethos that I work with, but I felt what felt right to kind of move on from that was that it sounds more like a process, and that's exactly what it is. It's this sense of bringing in spaciousness and time and the permission for things to not be as linear and, again in inverted commas, perfect as maybe my previous experiences, my early career experiences of creativity. And that was because I'd really gotten into yoga and to kind of South Asian traditions in terms of looking at the ritual, the rhythm, the ritual, and the kind of spaciousness that those kind of practices, pranayama, meditation, how they bring the clarity in actually by stepping back. So the idea of Stop, Breathe, Grow is that businesses and projects and ideas and concepts that want to thrive, maybe there's a sense of let's step back, take a pause, look at the bigger picture, the strategy maybe of how that fits into the wider picture, and also where they want to go. Not so much of like looking at what other people are expecting of them, but actually what is the dream, what is the vision. So there's a bit that, that's where sort of more strategy comes in than the actual creative. I mean, everything's creative. This is the thing. Even now, I'm decolonizing it as I speak, because everything is creativity. Everyone that I know that's like, no, I'm not creative at all, and I we talk for 5 minutes, and then you find out all of this incredible intuitive creativity that we as a society don't you to be creative, but it really is. So yeah, that is what brought me to the Firefly Creatrix, which was something, in the middle of 2022 or early 2022, there was this sense of there's something's going to change in terms of how I talk about creativity, and how creativity is my spiritual practice. And it's taken me until now to really own that, because at one point I thought I needed to step away from creativity to really, I became a yoga teacher, or I trained to become a yoga teacher. I did a lot of sort of self-development, personal development programs, which definitely have helped and shaped my approach to things. And at the time, I still thought that was because I needed, again, inverted commas, needed to be successful and to be true to who I am. I needed to step away from creativity, because it was this, the way that my creativity was coming through was slightly more consumer focused and corporate. And there's nothing, even working in the corporate world, there is still so much space for bringing in the energy of why are we doing this? If you know why you're doing it, then that's fine. It's the blind faith, the blind, the not knowing why, just doing it for the sake of doing it. So anyway, what I've come, this whole big circle, has been to come back to what my 4-year-old self knew, was that I'm a creative, and I now refer to myself as a visual magician, not so much as a graphic designer, although I still do have to use that term, in various settings. And also that I've done a post about this, but I don't like the word branding. Branding to me sounds like something we did, and we do, unfortunately still do, to cattle, to own it, to control it, and it's very much the power over dynamic rather than a power with, rather than a collaborative. It's more of a ownership coming down from above and creating hierarchy. So I prefer now to use the word illumination, so that it's like we're together, we are illuminating your idea, your concept, your again, I almost say the word brand, but your project, your dream, your vision, your company. And so again, it's just this curiosity, getting really curious around the language that we use within these settings. There's so many parts of society right now that are being massively called to be decolonized and to be questioned. Why do we say this? Where has that come from? What's the history? What's the origin? What's the etymology of this word? Why do we say this? And I think for me, as I say, I've jumped into other worlds, and they're so valuable to me. South Asian, I don't even know how I would describe it, but South Asian culture, South Asian practices, South Asian history has taught me so much, and it's still definitely a huge part of my life. And and yet there's this whole thread that has been so continuous through my life, which is creativity, that maybe that's where my kind of decolonization hat is supposed to sit. And I will join in all of the conversations in other sort of constructs happily, and I am doing, and yet creativity is the place where I have been most consistent throughout my life. So maybe I have insights that others don't have, although as I say, we're all creative. Please know that anything that you do, there's almost definitely a creativity to it. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there for our first intro, a little squiggle. I did a podcast not so long ago called Squiggly Lives. You can check out, they've got some lovely interviews, and I think that was just perfect for, again, breaking down this idea that a conversation, a podcast, anything, a career needs to be linear, because if there's anything that I've learnt so far on this life path, this earth walk, is that nothing is linear, and there are many cycles that I'm restarting right now. It really feels like in 2023 there's things that I can see that I'm like, oh, I was here, I've been here before, and yet now I'm coming back to it older, wiser, hopefully wiser, sometimes wiser, older, wiser, and a little bit more resourced to and conscious, that kind of sense of awareness. So yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to start this conversation. I'm not always so great on social media, so it just feels like to have a place to share verbally, that people can listen to in their pockets. And I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to know hear any thoughts, feedback, anything particularly you want to hear about the creative cycles, creative journeys. As the year goes on, maybe there'll be, there are many topics to focus on. This was a bit of a squiggly life journey, and I think that was perfect. the perfection is in the imperfection. So I wish you all so well. Have a beautiful day wherever this lands into your ears. And if you have any questions about the goddesses, if I can help you to find out what your natal moon goddess is, please feel free to message me, email me. You can find the contacts through the website, and I'd love to help with that. They are for sale, the cards, and also each individual goddess as well. So you can always just buy your natal moon goddess if you'd like to really deeply connect with her. All right, lots of love. Speak to you again soon. Bye. Thank you for joining our conversation today. Follow the Firefly Creatrix on Instagram and YouTube to discover more inspiring content.